For thousands of years, Zen masters have passed down ancient secrets about finding peace amidst life's constant changes. These aren't complex philosophies or difficult ideas. They're simple truths that speak directly to the heart. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. As we journey together through these teachings, allow your breathing to become naturally slower and deeper. There's nothing you need to achieve or understand perfectly. Simply let these ancient stories wash over you. Each teaching we'll explore tonight offers a pathway to the kind of inner peace that makes sleep not just possible, but profoundly restorative. The wisdom of Zen Buddhism reminds us that peace isn't something we must search for in distant places. It's always here, waiting to be recognized in this very moment, this very breath. Relax. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. Master Joshu was famous for living each day as if it were completely new. Students would often try to remind him of conversations from the day before or commitments he had made, but Joshu would look at them with genuine puzzlement, as if they were speaking of events from another lifetime. One evening, a traveling merchant arrived at Joshu's temple seeking shelter for the night. The merchant had heard of the master's reputation and hoped to receive some wisdom along with lodging. During their conversation over a simple meal, the merchant shared his troubles. "Master Joshu," the merchant said, "I cannot sleep peacefully anymore. 3 months ago, I made a terrible business decision that cost me nearly everything. I lost my shop, disappointed my family, and feel like I've failed everyone who trusted me. Each night, when I lie down, I replay that moment over and over, thinking of what I should have done differently." Joshu listened carefully, nodding with compassion. When the merchant finished, the master was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Where is this terrible decision now?" The merchant looked confused. "What do you mean, master?" "This decision that troubles you so much," Joshu said. "Where is it right now? Can you show it to me?" The merchant gestured vaguely. "It's in my memory, in my mind. It happened 3 months ago." "Ah," said Joshu, "but 3 months ago is not here." "If it's not here, how can it hurt you now?" "But the consequences," the merchant protested. "The results of that decision are still affecting my life today." Joshu nodded. "Yes, today you have less money than before. Today, your circumstances are different. But the decision itself, that moment of choosing, where is it?" The merchant sat in silence, beginning to understand. "Every morning," Joshu continued, "the sun rises new. Every breath you take has never been breathed before. Yet you insist on breathing yesterday's air, living in yesterday's moment. How exhausting that must be." The merchant's eyes filled with tears. "But how do I stop remembering? How do I stop feeling the pain of my mistake?" "You don't stop the memory from coming," Joshu replied gently. "You stop giving it a place to stay. When yesterday knocks on today's door, you can acknowledge it politely and let it move on. You don't have to invite it in for tea." That night, the merchant slept more peacefully than he had in months. When he woke, he found that Master Joshu was already working in the garden, completely absorbed in the task of weeding, as if their conversation had never happened. "Master," the merchant said, approaching, "thank you for your wisdom last night about letting go of yesterday." Joshu looked up from his weeding with genuine surprise. "Yesterday? I'm sorry, but I don't remember yesterday. I've been too busy with today." He smiled and returned to his work, pulling weeds with the same careful attention he brought to every present moment. The merchant realized he had received his final teaching. He left the temple that morning with a lighter step and a quieter mind, understanding that each moment offers a choice to carry the past or to travel light. Years later, people would ask the merchant how he had recovered so completely from his business failure. He would smile and say, "I learned from a wise man that yesterday is a place I no longer live." This story reveals one of Zen Buddhism's most practical teachings for peaceful sleep. Our minds have a tendency to replay the day's events, especially the difficult ones, long after they've ended. We carry conversations, mistakes, and worries from hours or even years ago, as if they were happening right now. Master Joshu understood something essential. The past exists only in memory, and memory exists only in the present moment. When we lie awake, rehashing old conversations or regrets, we're not actually dealing with past events. We're creating present suffering by giving energy to thoughts about things that no longer exist. This doesn't mean we ignore the lessons from our experiences or pretend difficult things didn't happen. The merchant still had to deal with his changed financial circumstances, but he learned to distinguish between addressing present realities and torturing himself with mental replays of past moments. The practice of releasing yesterday is especially important as we prepare for sleep. Our minds often become most active when we finally lie down, bringing up every unfinished conversation and unresolved situation from the day. Zen teaches us that this mental review is optional. We can acknowledge these thoughts without giving them a permanent residence in our consciousness. When memories of the day arise as you settle into rest tonight, you might try Master Joshu's approach. Notice the thought, acknowledge it politely, and let it move on. Don't try to push it away forcefully, but don't invite it to stay either. Like clouds passing through an empty sky, let these mental visitors drift through your awareness without setting up camp. The beautiful truth is that each moment of sleep offers a return to freshness. When we release our grip on yesterday's burdens, we make space for today's peace to emerge naturally. A young woman named Myoan had dedicated her life to Buddhist practice. She spent years studying sacred texts, learning meditation techniques, and building what she considered an impressive spiritual resume. She could recite hundreds of sutras from memory, sit in meditation for hours without moving, and explain complex philosophical concepts to other students. Myoan felt proud of her accomplishments and looked forward to the day when a master would recognize her achievements and perhaps invite her to become a teacher herself. She carried her knowledge like precious jewels, carefully polished and frequently displayed. One winter, Myoan decided to visit Master Bankei, a teacher known for his direct approach and ability to cut through spiritual pretensions. She packed her most treasured possession, a collection of handwritten notes containing insights from years of study. These notes represented everything she had learned and understood about Buddhism. The journey to Bankei's temple required crossing a frozen river. Local guides warned that the ice had been thinning due to an unexpected warm spell, but Myoan was eager to reach the master and confident in her ability to cross safely. Halfway across the river, the ice gave way. Myoan plunged into the freezing water and, despite her desperate efforts, watched helplessly as her precious bundle of notes was swept away by the current. Local fishermen rescued her from the water, but her years of accumulated spiritual knowledge disappeared downstream, dissolved into unreadable pulp. Myoan sat on the riverbank, shivering and devastated. Everything she had worked for, every insight she had carefully recorded, every achievement she had accumulated, was gone. She felt as if her entire spiritual identity had been erased in an instant. When she finally reached Bankei's temple, still damp and shaken, she could barely speak through her tears. "Master," she said, "I have lost everything. All my years of study, all my understanding, gone. I have nothing left to offer." Bankei looked at her with eyes full of warmth and understanding. "Wonderful," he said simply. Myoan stared at him in shock. "Wonderful? How can you say that? I've lost years of work." "What have you actually lost?" Bankei asked gently. "Can you no longer breathe? Has your capacity for kindness disappeared? Is your awareness gone?" "No, but my knowledge, my understanding." "Ah," Bankei smiled, "your collection. You've lost your collection. But tell me, what were you before you started collecting all that knowledge?" Myoan opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. She had been so focused on accumulating spiritual achievements that she had forgotten what lay beneath them all. "Before you learned your first sutra," Bankei continued, "what was already here? Before you understood your first teaching, what was listening?" In that moment, sitting with nothing left to prove or protect, Myoan experienced something she had never encountered in all her years of study. A profound stillness opened within her, a peace that needed no knowledge to sustain it, no achievements to validate it. "The river has been very kind to you," Bankei said softly. "It took away everything that was hiding your true nature." Myoan stayed at Bankei's temple for several months, but not to accumulate new knowledge. Instead, she learned to rest in the awareness that had been present all along, beneath all her spiritual collecting. When she eventually returned home, people noticed something different about her. She moved with a simplicity and presence that all her previous learning had never given her. When students asked her for teachings, she would often say, "The most important thing I learned was what I already knew before I learned anything." This story speaks to a different kind of burden we often carry into sleep, the weight of trying to be someone special or accomplished. Many of us have spent years building an identity around our knowledge, our skills, our spiritual or personal achievements. We go to bed worrying about maintaining these identities, proving our worth, or living up to the image we've created of ourselves. Myoan's experience reveals something liberating. Our deepest peace doesn't depend on any of our accumulated identities or achievements. Beneath all our roles, accomplishments, and self-images lies something much simpler and more restful, the basic awareness that witnesses all experience without needing to prove anything. In Zen Buddhism, this is sometimes called original nature or Buddha nature. It's not something we achieve through effort or lose through failure. It's the fundamental peace that was here before we started trying to become someone special, and it remains here when all our attempts at self-improvement fall away. As you prepare for sleep tonight, consider what collections you might be carrying. Not just physical possessions, but mental accumulations, your achievements, your self-image, your spiritual or personal progress. These things may have value in daily life, but they can become burdens when we feel we must constantly maintain and protect them. Sleep offers a beautiful opportunity to temporarily set down these collections and return to what you were before you started gathering them. Just as Myoan discovered peace when she stopped trying to be an accomplished spiritual student, you might find rest when you stop trying to be anyone in particular for these hours of sleep. The river that took away Myoan's notes revealed what had been hidden underneath, a natural peace that needs no maintenance, no protection, no improvement. This same peace is available to you now, not as a reward for spiritual accomplishment, but as your birthright, always present beneath whatever identity you've constructed. In the gentle darkness of sleep, you can let all your collections drift away and return to this original simplicity. Tomorrow you can pick up your roles and responsibilities again if you choose, but for now, rest in the knowledge that your deepest peace requires nothing more than your willingness to stop trying and simply be. Master Sengai lived in a small temple at the base of a mountain known for its sudden violent storms. The temple had been built there centuries earlier because of a natural spring that provided pure water, but the location also meant enduring harsh weather that could last for days. One autumn, a particularly fierce storm struck the region. For 3 days and nights, powerful winds howled around the temple, rain pounded the roof, and lightning split the sky. The storm was so intense that several trees fell, blocking the path to the village and trapping Sengai and his young attendant, Dogen, inside the temple. Dogen had only recently come to study with Sengai and was still learning the ways of Zen practice. As the storm raged on, he became increasingly agitated. He paced the temple halls, frequently checking the windows and expressing frustration about their situation. "Master," Dogen said on the second day, raising his voice to be heard over the wind, "this storm is terrible. I was supposed to visit my family in the village today. We're running low on rice. The roof is starting to leak in the corner. When will this end?" Sengai, who had been sitting quietly in meditation despite the chaos outside, opened his eyes and smiled. "Dogen," he said peacefully, "come sit with me and listen to the storm." "Listen to it?" Dogen replied with exasperation. "How can I ignore such terrible noise? It's keeping me from everything I need to do." "I didn't say ignore it," Sengai corrected gently. "I said, listen to it." Reluctantly, Dogen sat beside his master. At first, all he could hear was the overwhelming sound of wind and rain, which only increased his anxiety. But Sengai guided him to listen more carefully. "What do you hear in the wind?" Sengai asked. "Destruction," Dogen answered immediately. "Chaos. Problems. Listen deeper," the master encouraged. "The wind itself, what is it saying?" Gradually, as Dogen stopped fighting the sound and began to truly listen, something shifted. The howling wind, which had seemed like an enemy, began to sound different. There was a rhythm to it, a natural power that was neither good nor bad, but simply itself. "The wind doesn't hate us," Dogen said slowly, a new understanding dawning. "It's not trying to hurt us. It's just being wind." "Exactly," Sengai nodded. "And the rain?" Dogen listened again. "The rain is just being rain. It's not personal." As the storm continued into its third day, something remarkable happened to Dogen's experience. Instead of fighting the weather mentally, he began to appreciate its raw power. He noticed how the sound of rain on the roof created a natural rhythm for meditation. He observed how the dramatic sky, when glimpsed through the windows, had its own terrible beauty. When the storm finally passed and the sun broke through the clouds, Dogen was surprised to realize he felt almost disappointed. The 3 days he had initially seen as imprisonment had become a profound teaching. "Master," he said as they cleared fallen branches from the temple path, "I understand now. The storm was never the problem. My fighting against the storm was the problem." Sengai smiled as he picked up a broken branch. "Yes, and now you know something about your mind that will serve you well. When life brings storms, you can either exhaust yourself fighting the wind, or you can learn to dance with it. From that day forward, Dogen approached difficulties differently. When challenging situations arose, he would remember the storm and ask himself, am I fighting the wind, or am I learning its rhythm? Years later, when Dogen became a teacher himself, students would often ask him about handling life's difficulties. He would tell them about the 3-day storm and say, peace doesn't come from an absence of storms. It comes from finding your center within them. This story illustrates one of Zen Buddhism's most practical teachings for achieving inner peace, the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable in life. Storms come, plans get disrupted, circumstances change in ways we don't prefer. But suffering, the mental anguish we add to pain, is optional. Dogen initially created suffering by fighting mentally against the storm. He couldn't change the weather, but he could exhaust himself resisting it. When Sengai taught him to listen instead of fight, Dogen discovered that accepting the storm didn't mean liking it or becoming passive. It meant stopping the additional layer of mental resistance that was causing him more distress than the storm itself. This teaching is especially relevant for peaceful sleep. Many of us lie awake at night mentally fighting against things we cannot change. Difficult relationships, work situations, health concerns, or past decisions. This mental resistance creates a storm in our minds that can be more disturbing than the original circumstances. Zen practice suggests a different approach. Instead of trying to solve every problem before sleep, we can learn to rest peacefully even when external conditions aren't perfect. This doesn't mean ignoring real issues or becoming passive about things we can influence. It means recognizing what we can and cannot control and placing our energy accordingly. When worries arise as you prepare for sleep tonight, you might try Sengai's approach. Instead of fighting the thoughts, listen to them without resistance. Notice that thoughts, like storms, are natural phenomena that arise and pass away on their own. They only become problems when we struggle against them. The peace that Zen Buddhism offers isn't dependent on perfect circumstances. It's available right now, in the middle of whatever storms may be present in your life. Like learning to hear the rhythm in the wind, you can find rest even when external conditions aren't calm. Ijo was the most frustrated student at Master Dogen's monastery. While other monks seemed to slip naturally into deep meditation, Ijo's mind remained restlessly active no matter how hard he tried to concentrate. During sitting meditation, his thoughts raced. During walking meditation, he couldn't maintain focus. Even during simple tasks like sweeping, his mind wandered constantly. For months, Ijo tried every technique he had heard about. He attempted to force his mind into stillness through willpower. He tried counting his breaths, but would lose track after a few moments. He attempted to empty his mind of all thoughts, but this only seemed to create more mental activity. The harder he tried to achieve the peaceful states he observed in other students, the more agitated he became. Other monks would sit in meditation with serene expressions, their posture steady and minds apparently calm. Ijo would watch them enviously, wondering what was wrong with him that he couldn't achieve the same peace. He began to feel like a failure as a student, convinced he lacked the natural ability for Zen practice. One evening after a particularly difficult meditation session, Ijo approached Master Dogen with his frustration. "Master," he said, "I've been practicing for over a year, but my meditation is terrible. My mind won't stay still. Other students seem to find peace so easily, but I can't concentrate for even a few breaths. Perhaps I'm not suited for this path." Master Dogen listened carefully to Ijo's complaint. When the student finished, the master asked a simple question. "When your mind is active and distracted, who is noticing this?" Ijo paused, confused by the question. "I am, Master. I notice that my mind is wandering." "Ah," Dogen said with interest. "So even when your mind is restless, something in you is aware of this restlessness?" "Yes," Ijo replied, still not understanding the significance. "And this awareness that notices your distracted mind," Dogen continued, "is it itself distracted, or is it calm and clear?" Ijo had never considered this before. He reflected for a moment. The awareness itself seems steady. It's like a clear sky that can see both calm weather and storms. Dogen smiled. "You have been meditating perfectly all along. You've just been looking in the wrong direction." "I don't understand, Master." "You've been trying to control your thoughts and create peaceful states," Dogen explained. "But meditation is not about controlling thoughts. It's about recognizing the awareness that observes all thoughts, whether peaceful or agitated. This awareness doesn't need to be improved or perfected. It's already complete." "But what about my restless mind?" Ijo asked. "What about it?" Dogen replied. "Restless minds need meditation just as much as calm minds. Actually, they often make better meditation students because they don't have the illusion that they're already peaceful." From that conversation forward, Ijo's practice transformed completely. Instead of fighting his active mind, he began to rest in the awareness that could observe both restlessness and calm with equal clarity. He stopped trying to create perfect meditation states and started appreciating the awareness that was present regardless of what thoughts appeared. Paradoxically, as soon as Ijo stopped trying so hard to be peaceful, a natural peace began to emerge. His mind still sometimes wandered during meditation, but this no longer disturbed him. He understood that the wandering was just weather in the sky of awareness, and the sky itself remained untouched. 6 months later, new students would come to Ijo for guidance, drawn by his natural calm and lack of spiritual pretension. He would tell them, "The most important thing I learned was to stop trying to be a good meditator and start noticing what was already meditation itself." When students complained about their restless minds, Ijo would smile and say, "Wonderful. You're in perfect position to discover what doesn't need your mind to be different in order to be at peace." This story addresses a common source of bedtime anxiety, the pressure to be different than we are. Just as Ijo exhausted himself trying to force his mind into an ideal state, many of us lie awake trying to make our thoughts, feelings, or circumstances conform to some image of how they should be. Ijo's breakthrough came when he stopped fighting his restless mind and began to recognize the awareness that could observe restlessness without being disturbed by it. This awareness, what Zen calls our original nature, doesn't depend on any particular mental or emotional state to be at peace. This teaching is particularly helpful for those who struggle with an active mind at bedtime. Instead of fighting against thoughts or trying to force your mind to be quiet, you can learn to rest in the awareness that notices all mental activity. This awareness is naturally peaceful and doesn't require your thoughts to be any particular way. When you notice your mind being active as you prepare for sleep, instead of judging this as a problem, you might try Ijo's discovery. Who or what is noticing the mental activity? This noticing awareness itself is already still, even when what it notices is movement. Zen Buddhism teaches that we don't need to fix ourselves to find peace. We need to recognize the peace that's already present, observing all our human experiences with gentle acceptance. Like Ijo, you might discover that the very awareness that seems to have problems is actually the solution itself. The restless mind isn't an obstacle to peace, it's another opportunity to recognize the awareness that remains calm regardless of what thoughts appear. This awareness doesn't need meditation to be peaceful, doesn't need problems to be solved, and doesn't need you to be different than you are right now. As you settle into sleep tonight, you can rest in this awareness that accepts all experiences equally. Whether your mind is busy or quiet, whether your day was smooth or challenging, this fundamental awareness remains steady and can serve as a natural foundation for deep, restorative rest. Yamamoto was one of the richest merchants in all of Japan. His trading company owned ships that sailed to distant countries, warehouses filled with silk and spices, and shops in every major city. He lived in a magnificent estate with gardens designed by famous artists and owned treasures that emperors envied. Despite all his wealth, Yamamoto found himself strangely unsatisfied. Each new acquisition brought only temporary pleasure before the desire for something else arose. He had everything he thought he wanted, yet felt empty inside. Sleep became difficult, as his mind raced with plans for new ventures and worries about protecting what he'd already gained. Hearing of a famous Zen master named Ikkyu who lived simply in the mountains, Yamamoto decided to visit him. Perhaps this wise teacher could explain why all his success felt hollow. The journey to Ikkyu's hermitage required leaving his comfortable carriage and traveling on foot up narrow mountain paths. When Yamamoto finally arrived, he was shocked by what he found. The master lived in a tiny hut with walls so thin you could see daylight through the gaps. His possessions consisted of a single robe, one bowl, and a sleeping mat. Ikkyu welcomed Yamamoto warmly and invited him to share a simple meal of rice and pickled vegetables. The merchant, accustomed to elaborate banquets, felt awkward eating such plain food. He couldn't understand how anyone could be content with so little. Master Ikkyu, Yamamoto said after they finished eating, "I've come seeking wisdom. I have more wealth than most people see in a lifetime, yet I feel constantly restless and unsatisfied. You have almost nothing, yet you seem genuinely happy. How is this possible?" Ikkyu smiled and gestured toward his small window, where afternoon sunlight streamed in. "Tell me," he said, "do you own any sunlight?" "Of course not," Yamamoto replied, puzzled by the question. "No one can own sunlight. Yet you're enjoying it right now," Ikkyu observed. "Is it any less beautiful because you don't possess it?" The merchant had to admit that the sunlight was indeed beautiful, and that not owning it didn't diminish his experience of its warmth and brightness. "What about that bird singing outside?" Ikkyu continued. "Do you own its song?" "No," Yamamoto said, listening to the clear notes floating through the window. "Does that make the song less lovely?" Yamamoto began to understand where this was leading, but Ikkyu wasn't finished. "The mountain air you're breathing, the peace you feel in this moment, the taste of our simple meal, do you own any of these things?" "No, master." "Yet you're experiencing all of them fully," Ikkyu said gently. "You see, my friend, you've been trying to own experiences instead of simply having them. You collect possessions thinking they will give you the feelings you seek, but the feelings were always available without the possessions. Yamamoto sat quietly, absorbing this perspective. After a moment, he asked, "But surely having nice things can add to life's enjoyment?" "Certainly," Ikkyu agreed. "I don't suggest that comfort is wrong or that beauty has no value. But notice the difference between appreciating something and needing to possess it. When you require ownership for enjoyment, you limit yourself to only the tiny fraction of beauty that you can afford to buy." That evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Yamamoto experienced something he hadn't felt in years. Despite being far from his luxurious home, surrounded by none of his expensive possessions, he felt a deep contentment. The colors in the sky, the sounds of the forest, and the simple pleasure of quiet conversation created a richness that all his wealth had never provided. "I think I understand now," Yamamoto said. "I've been so busy trying to capture happiness that I forgot to simply be happy." Ikkyu nodded. "Happiness isn't something you can store in warehouses or display in your home. It's like this sunset. You can't own it, but you can receive it completely." When Yamamoto returned to his business life, he found that his relationship with wealth had transformed. He still conducted his affairs skillfully, but he no longer felt desperate to acquire more. He began to notice pleasures that cost nothing: morning bird songs, the taste of simple tea, conversations with friends. His sleep improved dramatically because his mind had stopped its restless reaching for the next thing. Years later, people would ask Yamamoto about the secret to his newfound peace. He would smile and say, "I learned that I was already rich beyond measure. I just had to stop trying to buy what I already owned." This story reveals a truth that modern life often obscures. Most of the experiences that bring genuine contentment are freely available to everyone. Yamamoto had been seeking through accumulation what was already present through simple awareness. In Zen Buddhism, this teaching is sometimes called just enough mind. It's the recognition that we already have access to most of what we need for happiness. The warmth of sunlight, the beauty of changing seasons, the satisfaction of breathing freely, the peace of a quiet moment. These experiences don't require ownership or achievement. This perspective is especially helpful for peaceful sleep. Much of our bedtime mental activity consists of wanting different circumstances, wanting to solve problems, wanting security or success or love. This endless reaching keeps the mind active and prevents natural rest. When we learn to appreciate what's already present, the mind can finally relax. Instead of lying awake planning how to get more of what we want, we can rest in gratitude for what we already have. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on goals, but rather finding contentment that doesn't depend on circumstances being different. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might try Ikkyu's exercise. Notice what you're experiencing right now that you couldn't buy if you tried. The comfort of your bed, the air you're breathing, the simple miracle of consciousness itself. These gifts are yours not because you earned them or purchased them, but simply because you're alive and aware. The restless mind that seeks more and more finally finds peace when it recognizes the abundance that's always been here. Like Yamamoto discovering that he was already rich, you might find that the contentment you've been seeking is available right now, in this simple moment of rest. At Shunryu Suzuki's temple lived an ordinary orange cat named Tama. Unlike the human students who came to study Zen, Tama had no interest in spiritual teachings, meditation techniques, or enlightenment. She spent her days doing what cats do, sleeping in sunny spots, hunting mice, and grooming herself with complete attention. The human students at the temple worked very hard at their practice. They sat in meditation for hours, studied complex texts, and worried constantly about their spiritual progress. They compared themselves to other students and to famous masters from the past. Many struggled with doubt about whether they were practicing correctly or making sufficient advancement on the path. One student named Kenji was particularly troubled by his apparent lack of progress. He had been practicing for 3 years, but felt no closer to enlightenment than when he started. His mind still wandered during meditation. He still got angry when things didn't go his way, and he still felt confused about the deeper teachings. One afternoon, Kenji sat in the garden feeling frustrated about his practice. Tama appeared and settled down in a patch of sunlight nearby. The cat stretched luxuriously, then curled into a perfect circle and began to purr with what seemed like complete satisfaction. "Look at that cat," Kenji thought bitterly. "She has no spiritual practice at all, yet she seems more peaceful than any of us students." Master Suzuki happened to walk by at that moment and noticed Kenji's troubled expression. "What's bothering you?" the master asked. "Master," Kenji said, "I've been practicing for years, but I still feel far from enlightenment." Yet that cat just lies there doing nothing, and she seems perfectly content. It doesn't seem fair. Suzuki looked at Tama, who was now washing her paw with complete focus. "What makes you think Tama isn't enlightened?" he asked. Kenji was startled by the question. "She's just an animal. She doesn't meditate or study or practice." "Watch her more carefully," Suzuki suggested. "When Tama is washing, is she thinking about yesterday's meal or planning tomorrow's nap?" Kenji observed the cat more closely. Tama was utterly absorbed in cleaning her paw, giving it her complete attention without any apparent mental commentary. "No," Kenji admitted. "She seems completely present. When she sleeps, does she worry about whether she's sleeping correctly?" "No, she just sleeps." "When she's hungry, does she feel guilty about wanting food, or does she simply seek food? She just seeks food without drama." Suzuki nodded. "And when she's content, does she question whether her contentment is spiritual enough, or does she simply rest in contentment?" "She simply rests in it," Kenji said, beginning to understand. "Tama lives each moment completely," Suzuki explained. "She doesn't add extra layers of thinking about her experience. When she's hungry, she's just hungry. When she's content, she's just content. She doesn't compare her current state to some ideal state she thinks she should achieve." Kenji watched as Tama finished grooming and settled back into her sunny spot, her purring audible from several feet away. There was something profound in the cat's simple presence, a quality of being completely at ease with herself and her circumstances. "But Master," Kenji protested, "surely there's more to enlightenment than just being like a cat." Suzuki smiled. "The Buddha nature that we seek is not something we need to create or achieve. It's our original condition before we complicate it with seeking and striving. Tama hasn't lost touch with this natural state because she never learned to think it was missing." From that day forward, Kenji began to study Tama as much as he studied Buddhist texts. He noticed how she ate when hungry without guilt, slept when tired without resistance, and played when energetic without self-consciousness. Most remarkably, she seemed to live without the constant mental commentary that made human life so complicated. Gradually, Kenji learned to approach his own practice with more of Tama's simplicity. Instead of constantly evaluating his meditation, he began to simply meditate. Instead of worrying about spiritual progress, he focused on being present to whatever was happening right now. 6 months later, Master Suzuki announced that Kenji had made remarkable progress in his understanding. When other students asked Kenji what had changed in his practice, he would smile and say, "I learned to be more like the temple cat. I stopped trying to become enlightened and started being what I already am." Years later, when Kenji became a teacher himself, he would often point out to students that the temple cats were the most accomplished practitioners in the monastery. "They live in perfect Buddha nature," he would say, "not because they achieved it, but because they never believed they had lost it." This delightful story points to one of Zen Buddhism's most counterintuitive teachings. What we seek is not something we need to achieve, but something we need to stop obscuring. Tama the cat lived in natural peace, not because she was spiritually advanced, but because she was simple. Human beings have a unique gift of self-awareness, but this gift can become a burden when we use it to constantly evaluate and judge our experience. We think about thinking, worry about worrying, and try to improve our improving. This mental complexity, while sometimes useful, can separate us from the simple presence that brings genuine peace. Tama's example shows us what Zen calls ordinary mind. She wasn't trying to be spiritual or achieve special states. She was simply present to whatever was happening without adding layers of commentary or judgment. When hungry, she was just hungry. When content, she was just content. This teaching is particularly relevant for sleep. Many of us lie awake thinking about our thinking, worrying about our worrying, or trying to force ourselves into the right state for sleep. We create a complex mental project out of something that should be simple. Tama's approach suggests a different way. Instead of trying to create the perfect conditions for sleep, we can simply rest in whatever conditions are present. Instead of evaluating whether we're relaxing correctly, we can just allow the natural process of relaxation to unfold. The cat's contentment wasn't based on having achieved anything special. It arose from her willingness to be completely present to simple experience without mental elaboration. This same contentment is available to you right now, not as a reward for spiritual practice, but as your natural state when you stop complicating it. As you settle into sleep tonight, you might try being more like Tama. When you notice your mind creating stories about your experience, gently return to simple presence. When sleepy, just be sleepy. When comfortable, just be comfortable. The peace you seek isn't something to achieve, but something to stop preventing through mental complexity. Like the temple cat who taught enlightenment without saying a word, your own natural wisdom emerges when you stop trying so hard to be wise and simply allow yourself to be what you already are, aware, present, and naturally at peace beneath all the mental commentary. Master Hakuin was known throughout Japan as a serious and disciplined Zen teacher. His monastery followed strict schedules, his students practiced rigorous meditation, and his reputation was built on the traditional austere approach to spiritual training. Hakuin himself had spent decades in silent meditation, often sitting motionless for hours at a time. One day, a traveling performer arrived at the monastery seeking shelter. She was a traditional dancer who made her living entertaining at festivals and celebrations throughout the country. Her art form was considered worldly and far removed from spiritual practice, the opposite of everything Hakuin's monastery represented. The dancer, whose name was Misaki, was respectful but puzzled by the monastery's atmosphere of serious silence. During her stay, she watched the monks moving through their daily routines with careful, measured steps and wondered aloud to Hakuin, "Master, why does everyone here move so slowly and deliberately? Are you trying to avoid disturbing something?" Hakuin explained that slow, mindful movement was part of their meditation practice. "We move with awareness," he said, "to cultivate inner stillness and avoid the distractions of hasty action." Misaki nodded politely, but seemed unconvinced. "May I show you something?" she asked. With Hakuin's permission, she began to dance. Her movement was unlike anything seen in the monastery. She spun and leaped with incredible grace, her silk scarves flowing like water, her steps creating complex rhythms on the wooden floor. Yet, as Hakuin watched, he noticed something extraordinary. Despite the vigorous movement, Misaki's face showed a quality of perfect calm. Her eyes were soft and present, her breathing steady, her entire being centered despite the dynamic activity. When the dance ended, Misaki stood perfectly still, not even breathing heavily despite the energetic performance. In that moment of stillness, Hakuin could sense a depth of inner quiet that rivaled anything he had experienced in his years of motionless meditation. "How do you maintain such peace while moving so intensely?" Hakuin asked, genuinely curious. Misaki smiled. "Master, you seek stillness by avoiding movement. I find stillness within movement. The dance doesn't disturb my center, it reveals it." "But surely such vigorous activity must create mental agitation," Hakuin protested. "Watch your own mind right now," Misaki suggested. "You've been sitting calmly, yet I can see thoughts moving through your awareness. Are you disturbed by these thoughts, or can you remain centered while they arise and pass?" Hakuin had to admit that his mind contained constant subtle movement, even during supposedly still meditation. "My body dances," Misaki continued, "but my awareness remains like the center of a spinning wheel. The rim moves rapidly, but the center is perfectly still. I don't try to stop the wheel from spinning, I rest in its motionless heart." This conversation deeply affected Hakuin. He began to question whether his pursuit of external stillness had actually been limiting his understanding of true peace. That evening, he tried something unprecedented. He attempted to maintain meditative awareness while walking quickly, then while performing daily tasks with normal speed rather than deliberate slowness. To his surprise, he discovered that inner stillness didn't require outer stillness. When he stopped trying to create perfect external conditions for peace and instead learned to find the center that remained calm regardless of circumstances, his practice deepened significantly. Over the following months, Hakuin incorporated movement meditation into his teaching. He learned from Misaki that stillness is not the absence of movement, but the presence of centered awareness that remains unshaken by any external activity. Years later, when students would ask Hakuin about the most important lesson he had learned, he would often mention the dancing master who taught him that trying to stop the world in order to find peace was like trying to flatten the ocean to see its depths. True stillness, he would say, is not disturbed by movement. It includes movement within itself, like space includes all objects without being affected by them. When Misaki eventually continued on her travels, she left behind a transformed monastery where students learned that meditation could happen in any circumstance, not just in perfect silence and stillness. This story challenges a common misconception about finding inner peace. Many of us believe we need ideal conditions to feel calm. a quiet environment, comfortable circumstances, absence of stress or demands. While these conditions can certainly be helpful, depending on them entirely limits our access to peace. Misaki's teaching reveals that true stillness is not a fragile state that external movement can destroy. Instead, it's a fundamental quality of awareness itself that can be present regardless of what's happening around us or even in our bodies and minds. This understanding is particularly valuable for those who struggle to find peace in daily life. If tranquility only exists in perfect silence, then most of us would have very limited access to it. But if stillness can be found within movement, then peace becomes available in any circumstance. The image of the wheel is especially helpful. The hub of a wheel remains perfectly still even when the rim spins rapidly. Similarly, at the center of our awareness lies a stillness that isn't disturbed by the movement of thoughts, emotions, or external events. Learning to rest in this center, rather than trying to slow down the wheel, is a key to finding peace in any situation. This teaching applies directly to sleep as well. Many people believe they need perfect silence and stillness to rest deeply. While external quiet can certainly help, true restorative sleep comes from finding inner stillness that doesn't depend on external conditions being perfect. When you notice sounds or movements that might typically disturb your rest, you can practice finding the still center within awareness that remains unaffected by these disturbances. Like Misaki dancing with perfect inner calm, you can learn to rest peacefully even when conditions aren't ideal. As you prepare for sleep tonight, remember that the peace you seek isn't fragile or dependent on everything being just right. It's the fundamental stillness of awareness itself, always present at the center of experience, waiting to be recognized regardless of what else might be happening. In a busy town along the main road between Tokyo and Kyoto lived an innkeeper named Yamada. His inn was always full of travelers, merchants, and pilgrims, creating constant noise and activity from dawn until well past midnight. Guests would arrive at all hours, horses needed tending, meals required preparation, and disputes occasionally broke out that needed his intervention. From the outside, Yamada's life appeared to be the opposite of peaceful. He rarely had a quiet moment, never knew what emergency might arise next, and seemed to live in perpetual motion. Other innkeepers in town complained constantly about the stress of their work, but Yamada remained remarkably calm and cheerful despite the chaos surrounding him. A traveling monk named Dogen, who had studied at several monasteries, stayed at Yamada's inn for a week while recovering from illness. Dogen was puzzled by the innkeeper's serene demeanor amidst such constant commotion. "Yamada-san," Dogen said one evening after a particularly hectic day, "I've been observing you all week. Guests wake you in the middle of the night, children run screaming through your halls, merchants argue loudly over their meals, yet you seem more peaceful than many monks I know who live in silent retreats. What's your secret?" Yamada laughed warmly. "Secret? I have no secret. I simply run an inn. But how do you maintain such calm in such chaos?" Dogen pressed. "At the monastery where I trained, we needed perfect silence for meditation. Yet you seem to meditate constantly, even in the middle of noise and activity." Yamada paused in his work of cleaning tables and considered the question. "Tell me, monk, when you sit in meditation in your quiet monastery, what are you listening to?" "The silence," Dogen replied. "We listen to the silence and try to keep our minds still." "And when sounds arise, what do you do?" We try to ignore them or wish they would go away so we can return to silence. Yamada nodded thoughtfully. I used to think like that when I first took over this inn from my father. I was constantly frustrated by interruptions, always wishing for quiet so I could have some peace. I was miserable. What changed? Dogen asked. One night, when the inn was particularly noisy with a group of celebration travelers, I was lying in bed feeling sorry for myself when I had a realization. I was fighting against the very nature of running an inn. It would be like a fish complaining about water or a bird being upset about air. Yamada resumed cleaning as he continued his explanation. I realized that the noise and activity weren't preventing me from finding peace. They were the actual conditions within which I needed to find peace. So, instead of waiting for silence, I began to listen to the sounds differently. How do you mean? Dogen asked with genuine interest. Instead of hearing noise as a problem, I began to hear it as music, Yamada explained. The sound of footsteps became rhythm, conversations became melody, even arguments became part of the composition. Instead of trying to escape the sounds, I learned to rest within them. That evening, Dogen sat quietly in the inn's common room, experimenting with Yamada's approach. At first, the various sounds seemed chaotic and disturbing. But gradually, as he stopped fighting against them and began to listen with acceptance, something shifted. The noise didn't disappear, but his resistance to it did. In that shift, he found a quality of peace that didn't require silence. It's remarkable, Dogen told Yamada the next morning. When I stopped trying to push away the sounds, I found stillness within them. Yes, Yamada agreed. And now you understand why I can rest peacefully even in the middle of activity. Peace isn't something that happens in the absence of life. It's something that can be present within life itself. Before leaving the inn, Dogen asked Yamada if he had ever considered becoming a formal student of Zen. Yamada smiled. Every moment here is my Zen practice. Every guest is my teacher. Every sound is my meditation bell. Why would I need to go somewhere else to find what's already here? After returning to his monastery, Dogen found that his meditation practice had been transformed by his week with the innkeeper. He no longer needed perfect silence to find inner quiet. He had learned that true peace includes rather than excludes the sounds of life. Years later, when Dogen became a respected teacher, he would often tell his students about the innkeeper who taught him that enlightenment doesn't require escaping the world, but learning to find the sacred within the ordinary, the silent within the sound, the still within the moving. Yamada's teaching addresses one of the most common obstacles to inner peace, the belief that we need to escape our circumstances to find tranquility. The innkeeper couldn't change the fundamental nature of his work, but he could transform his relationship to its challenges. His shift from fighting noise to embracing it as music illustrates a profound principle of Zen practice. Resistance to what is already happening creates suffering, while acceptance of present conditions opens the door to peace. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on improving difficult situations, but rather finding inner calm that doesn't depend on external circumstances being different. Yamada's discovery that he could rest within activity rather than needing to escape from it has particular relevance for modern life. Most of us live with constant background noise, interruptions, and demands on our attention. If peace were only possible in perfect quiet, it would remain largely inaccessible. But Yamada's example shows that we can learn to find the silence within sound, the stillness within movement, the rest within activity. This isn't about tolerating noise, but about discovering a deeper quality of peace that includes, rather than excludes, the sounds of life. For those preparing for sleep, this teaching offers freedom from the need for perfect conditions. While it's certainly helpful to create as peaceful an environment as possible, your capacity for deep rest doesn't have to depend entirely on external silence. When sounds arise that might typically disturb your sleep, you can practice Yamada's approach. Instead of fighting against the sounds, try listening to them as part of a larger symphony. Instead of needing them to stop, see if you can find rest within them. This shift from resistance to acceptance often transforms our experience dramatically. The sounds don't necessarily change, but our relationship to them does. In that change of relationship, we discover a peace that's more stable and reliable because it doesn't require the world to be different than its island. As you settle into rest tonight, remember Yamada's wisdom. Peace doesn't require escaping life, but learning to find the sacred silence that exists at the heart of all experience, available even in the midst of activity and sound. This inner stillness is always present, waiting to be recognized, whether your environment is perfectly quiet or filled with the music of life itself. Eisai had been practicing meditation at Master Dogen's monastery for over 2 years, but he felt like a complete failure. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't achieve the peaceful states he observed in other students. During sitting meditation, he would force his spine rigid and fight against every wandering thought. He tried to control his breathing, empty his mind, and create the perfect meditative experience through sheer willpower. The harder Eisai tried, the more agitated he became. His shoulders would tense with effort, his jaw would clench with concentration, and his mind would race with frustration about his inability to be peaceful. After meditation sessions, he felt more stressed than when he began. Other students seemed to slip naturally into serene states, while Eisai struggled just to sit still for 30 minutes without internal warfare. He began to wonder if he lacked some essential quality needed for Zen practice. One morning, after a particularly difficult meditation session where he had fought against his thoughts for an hour, Eisai approached Master Dogen in desperation. "Master," he said, "I've been practicing as hard as I can for 2 years, but I'm getting worse, not better. I try to make my mind peaceful, but it becomes more agitated. I try to sit perfectly, but my body becomes tense. I try to be present, but I get lost in trying. What am I doing wrong?" Master Dogen listened carefully to Eisai's complaint. When the student finished, the master asked a simple question. "When you try to fall asleep at night, does trying help you sleep?" Eisai paused, confused by what seemed like an unrelated question. "No, Master. The harder I try to fall asleep, the more awake I become." "And how do you actually fall asleep?" The master continued. "I stop trying and just let it happen naturally." Dogen nodded. "Your meditation is like trying to fall asleep. The more you force it, the more it resists you." "But Master," Eisai protested, "surely meditation requires effort and discipline." "There's a difference between effort and force," Dogen explained. "Right now, you're using the wrong kind of effort. You're trying to create a particular experience instead of allowing awareness to be what it naturally island." "I don't understand the difference." Dogen gestured toward a tree visible through the window. "Does that tree try to be a tree? Does it force its leaves to grow or struggle to stand upright? No, it just naturally grows according to its nature. Yet it's not passive or lazy. It responds to sunlight, sends down roots, adapts to weather. there's tremendous activity, but no forcing. That afternoon, Dogen gave Aisai a new instruction. For the next week, don't try to meditate. Just sit and be curious about what's already here. Don't try to change anything or achieve any particular state. Simply notice what happens when you stop forcing. Aisai felt uncertain about this approach. After years of trying harder, the idea of not trying at all seemed like giving up. But he was desperate enough to experiment with Dogen's suggestion. The next morning, instead of forcing his posture into perfect position, Aisai sat comfortably and allowed his body to find its natural alignment. Instead of fighting his thoughts, he watched them with gentle curiosity. Instead of trying to create peace, he noticed the awareness that was observing both agitation and calm. Something remarkable happened. When Aisai stopped trying to force meditation to be different than it was, a natural settling began to occur. His breathing slowed on its own. His muscles relaxed without effort. His mind, no longer being pushed around, began to settle like muddy water, becoming clear when left undisturbed. By the end of the week, Aisai had experienced deeper peace than in all his previous months of forcing. When he reported this to Master Dogen, the teacher smiled. "You discovered the difference between effortless effort and effortful effort," Dogen said. "Now you know that the awareness you were trying so hard to create was already here, waiting to be recognized." From that point forward, Aisai's practice transformed completely. He learned to approach meditation like tending a garden, providing the right conditions, and allowing natural processes to unfold rather than trying to force flowers to bloom. Years later, when students would come to Aisai struggling with their own practice, he would tell them, "Stop trying to meditate and start allowing meditation to happen through you." The difference is like the difference between pushing a river and flowing with it. This story illustrates one of the most important distinctions in Zen practice, the difference between allowing and forcing. Aisai's initial approach was based on the assumption that spiritual states must be created through effort and control. But this kind of trying actually interferes with the natural peace that's already present. The comparison to falling asleep is particularly apt because sleep is something that happens to us rather than something we do. The more we try to force sleep, the more elusive it becomes. Sleep arrives when we create the right conditions and then get out of our own way. This principle applies to many aspects of life, not just meditation and sleep. Creativity flows more easily when we stop forcing it. Relationships deepen when we stop trying to control them. Even problem solving often happens more effectively when we allow solutions to emerge rather than grinding them out through mental effort. The tree metaphor that Master Dogen used reveals the nature of effortless effort. Trees don't force themselves to grow, yet they're constantly active, reaching toward light, extending roots, adapting to conditions. This is activity without strain, responsiveness without force. In Zen terms, this approach is called wo wei, or not doing. It doesn't mean being passive or lazy, but rather acting in harmony with natural processes instead of fighting against them. It's the difference between swimming with a current and swimming against it. For those seeking peaceful sleep, this teaching is especially relevant. Many people try to force themselves to relax, which creates the paradox of stressing about stress relief. Instead, we can create conditions that support natural rest and then allow the body's wisdom to take over. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might experiment with Aisai's discovery. Instead of trying to make your mind quiet or force your body to relax, simply notice what's already here. Allow your breathing to find its own rhythm. Let your muscles release in their own time. Trust the natural intelligence of your body to move toward rest without your micromanagement. The peace you seek isn't something you must create through effort. It's something that emerges naturally when you stop interfering with it through excessive trying. In a remote mountain monastery lived a Zen master named Gute, who had developed an unusual reputation. Students who came seeking his teaching would often find him napping under a large pine tree in the monastery garden. At first, many visitors assumed he was simply old and lazy, but those who stayed longer began to notice something extraordinary about his presence. Even while appearing to sleep, Gute seemed to be teaching. Students would sit near him with their questions and problems, and somehow, without the master speaking a word, insights would arise in their minds. Solutions to long-standing difficulties would become clear. Peace would settle over agitated hearts. One ambitious young monk named Joso traveled to the monastery specifically to study with Gute. Joso had heard conflicting reports about this teacher, some calling him enlightened, others dismissing him as a fraud who did nothing but sleep. When Joso arrived, he found Gute exactly as described, resting peacefully under his tree, apparently fast asleep. Joso waited respectfully for the master to wake up and begin teaching. Hours passed. Gute continued sleeping. As evening approached, Joso grew impatient. He had traveled for days to receive instruction from this supposedly wise teacher, only to find a man who seemed to do nothing but nap. Finally, Joso cleared his throat loudly to wake the master. Gute opened his eyes slowly and looked at Joso with a gentle smile. "Yes?" "Master Gute," Joso said formally, "I have come seeking your teaching. When will you begin instructing students?" "I've been teaching you all afternoon," Gute replied calmly. Joso looked confused. "But you were sleeping. How can you teach while sleeping?" "Who told you I was sleeping?" Gute asked with interest. "I could see with my own eyes. You were lying under the tree with your eyes closed, breathing slowly, completely still." Gute nodded. "And what did you do while I was in this state?" "I sat quietly and waited for you to wake up." "Ah," said Gute, "so you learned to sit quietly and wait." That's the first lesson. Joso felt frustrated by what seemed like word games. "Master, I need real teaching about meditation, enlightenment, the nature of reality. I can't learn anything meaningful from watching someone sleep." "Can't you?" Gute asked. "Tell me, while you sat watching me, what was the quality of your mind?" Joso paused to consider. "I suppose it was relatively calm. I wasn't thinking about much, except waiting." "And your body?" "It was relaxed from sitting still for so long." "Your breathing?" "It slowed down to match the peaceful atmosphere." Gute smiled. "So, in the presence of someone who appeared to be doing nothing, you naturally became calm, relaxed, and present. How is this not teaching?" Over the following days, Joso continued to sit with Gute during his frequent naps. Initially, he felt like he was wasting time, but gradually he began to appreciate the profound stillness that surrounded the master even in apparent sleep. Joso noticed that his own mind became extraordinarily quiet in Gute's presence. Problems that had seemed urgent began to feel less pressing. Anxiety about his spiritual progress dissolved into simple contentment with the present moment. One afternoon, while sitting beside the apparently sleeping master, Joso had a sudden realization. Gute wasn't teaching through words or actions, but through being. His mere presence, his embodiment of complete peace, was transmitting something that no lecture could convey. When Gute opened his eyes that evening, Joso said, "Master, I think I understand now. You're not sleeping. You're demonstrating what complete rest looks like." "And what does complete rest look like?" Gute asked. "It looks like someone who doesn't need to be anywhere else or doing anything else. Someone who is so completely present that even sleep becomes a teaching." Gute laughed delightedly. "Now you're beginning to understand. Most people think teaching requires talking, demonstrating, explaining. But the deepest teaching happens through presence itself. But how do you maintain such presence even while sleeping?" "Who says I'm sleeping?" Gute replied with a twinkle in his eye. "Perhaps I'm more awake than I've ever been. When you stop trying to be awake in the conventional sense, you discover a deeper wakefulness that includes rest within itself." Joso stayed at the monastery for several months, learning to understand presence as a teaching in itself. When he finally left, other students asked him what he had learned from the master who slept all the time. "I learned that the deepest wisdom is often transmitted in silence," Joso replied, "and that true wakefulness doesn't exclude rest, but includes it. Master Gute taught me more while appearing to sleep than I had learned from years of active study elsewhere." This story reveals a profound truth about how transformation actually occurs. We often assume that change requires intense effort, constant activity, and direct instruction. But Gute's teaching demonstrates that presence itself can be more powerful than any technique or explanation. The master's apparent sleeping was actually a demonstration of complete acceptance and non-resistance. He had achieved such harmony with natural rhythms that rest and awareness had become unified. His sleep was not unconsciousness, but a different quality of consciousness, one that included rest within awareness rather than seeing them as opposites. Joso's experience shows how being in the presence of someone who embodies peace can naturally evoke peace in others. This happens not through effort or transmission of information, but through a kind of resonance. Just as tuning forks will synchronize their vibrations when placed near each other, consciousness has a tendency to harmonize with whatever it encounters. This teaching has practical implications for how we approach both rest and awakening. Many of us treat sleep as the opposite of awareness, a state we fall into when consciousness shuts down. But Gute's example suggests that rest and awareness can coexist, that we can be simultaneously deeply relaxed and gently awake. This understanding can transform our approach to sleep. Instead of trying to knock ourselves unconscious or escape from awareness, we can learn to rest within awareness. Sleep becomes not a loss of consciousness, but a different quality of consciousness, one that includes the body's natural restoration process within the field of gentle awareness. Gute's teaching method also reveals something about the nature of non-striving. He wasn't trying to teach, yet teaching happened naturally through his presence. He wasn't working to help others, yet his very being was beneficial. This is the essence of Wu Wei, effectiveness arising from being rather than doing. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might experiment with Gute's approach. Instead of trying to fall asleep, try simply being present to the process of rest. Allow awareness to include the body's natural settling without trying to control or hurry it. Like Joso sitting in the presence of the peaceful master, you can let your system naturally attune to the rhythm of rest. You don't need to force sleep to happen any more than Gute needed to force teaching to occur. Both arise naturally when conditions are right, and when we stop interfering with natural processes through excessive effort. The deepest rest comes not from escaping awareness, but from allowing awareness to include rest within itself, discovering that wakefulness and sleep are not opposites, but different expressions of the same fundamental consciousness. Master Kyogen was known throughout the region as the most demanding and critical teacher in all of Japan. Students would leave his monastery in tears, convinced they were failures who could never understand Zen. His teaching methods seemed designed to break down confidence rather than build it up. He would point out every flaw, criticize every answer, and dismiss most attempts at understanding with apparent contempt. Few students could endure Kyogen's harsh treatment for long, but those who did often became exceptional teachers themselves. Other masters wondered what made Kyogen's methods so effective despite their severity. A young monk named Tenzo arrived at Kyogen's monastery, having heard about the master's fearsome reputation. Tenzo was particularly sensitive to criticism, having grown up with harsh, demanding parents who never seemed satisfied with his efforts. Despite his fears, he felt drawn to study with Kyogen, hoping to find the strength he felt he lacked. From the first day, Kyogen treated Tenzo exactly as he treated all students. He criticized Tenzo's meditation posture, called his understanding shallow, and seemed to find fault with everything he did. Tenzo felt crushed, his old wounds of inadequacy reopening under the master's relentless criticism. After 2 months of this treatment, Tenzo was ready to leave. He felt worse about himself than when he arrived and couldn't see how such harsh treatment could lead to enlightenment. The night before his planned departure, he sat alone in the monastery garden, feeling like a complete failure. As he sat there, Tenzo heard voices coming from the master's quarters. Through an open window, he could see Kyogen speaking with his senior assistant, apparently unaware that anyone could overhear. "How is the young monk Tenzo progressing?" the assistant asked. To Tenzo's amazement, Kyogen's voice was completely different from the harsh tone he used in teaching. It was warm, gentle, filled with genuine care. "Tenzo has extraordinary potential," Kyogen said softly. "His sensitivity, which makes him suffer under criticism, is actually his greatest strength. He feels everything deeply, which means he can develop profound compassion. But first, he must learn that his worth doesn't depend on external approval." "But Master," the assistant said, "your criticism seems to be crushing him rather than strengthening him." Kyogen sighed deeply. "Yes, I know it's painful for him. It's painful for me to watch. But Tenzo spent his childhood believing that love had to be earned through perfection. Until he learns that his essential nature is worthy of respect, regardless of performance, he'll never be free." How does harsh criticism teach him this? By showing him that even the worst criticism imaginable cannot touch who he really is, Kyogen explained. When he stops trying to earn my approval and starts recognizing his own inherent value, the criticism will bounce off him like rain off a mountain. That's when he'll be ready for real teaching. Tenzo listened in shock. Everything he had interpreted as cruelty was actually a form of medicine designed to cure him of his need for external validation. The next morning, instead of leaving, Tenzo approached his daily interactions with Kyogen differently. When the master criticized his meditation, instead of feeling crushed, Tenzo listened for what might be useful in the feedback while not taking the harsh tone personally. "Your posture is lazy," Kyogen said during morning meditation. "You sit like a bag of rice." For the first time, instead of feeling shame, Tenzo simply adjusted his posture and noticed that the criticism, while bluntly delivered, contained helpful information. The harsh tone no longer seemed like a judgment of his worth as a person. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. As Tenzo stopped trying to earn Kyogen's approval, he began to experience his own inner stability. The master's criticism continued, but it no longer had the power to devastate him. One day, after Kyogen had delivered a particularly sharp critique of Tenzo's understanding, the student looked directly at his teacher and smiled peacefully. "Thank you, Master," Tenzo said with genuine gratitude. "I can see the wisdom in your words without needing you to deliver them kindly." For the first time, Kyogen smiled back. From that day forward, his teaching style with Tenzo became gentler, but it didn't matter, because Tenzo no longer needed gentleness to feel secure in his own worth. Years later, when Tenzo became a teacher himself, students were struck by his extraordinary combination of honest feedback and warm compassion. When they asked him how he learned to balance truth-telling with kindness, he would say, "I had a teacher who loved me enough to help me discover that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone's opinion, including his own." This story reveals something important about the relationship between criticism and self-worth. Kyogen's seemingly harsh method was actually designed to help Tenzo discover that his essential value couldn't be damaged by external judgment. However, this approach worked only because underneath the harsh exterior was genuine care and wisdom about what Tenzo specifically needed. The story doesn't suggest that harsh criticism is generally helpful or that we should seek out people who treat us badly. Most criticism that feels crushing is not delivered with Kyogen's underlying wisdom and compassion. The key insight is that our reactions to criticism often reveal our own attachments to external validation. When we depend on others' approval for our sense of worth, any criticism becomes a threat to our identity. But when we recognize our inherent value that doesn't depend on performance or others' opinions, criticism can become simply information that we can evaluate objectively. This teaching is particularly relevant for the self-criticism that often keeps us awake at night. Many of us have internalized harsh voices from our past, replaying judgments and criticisms long after the original situations have ended. We lie in bed, rehearsing conversations where we were criticized or berating ourselves for mistakes and failures. Tenzo's journey suggests a different approach. Instead of trying to silence the critical voices or defend against them, we can learn to recognize that these judgments, however harsh, cannot actually touch our fundamental worth. Like rain on a mountain, they may make noise, but they don't change the essential nature of what they fall upon. This doesn't mean accepting truly harmful treatment from others or dismissing legitimate feedback. It means developing the inner stability that allows us to hear information without allowing it to define our self-worth. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might notice any critical voices that arise in your mind. Instead of fighting them or believing them completely, you can practice Tenzo's discovery. These voices, whatever their content, cannot diminish your essential nature. They're weather patterns in the sky of consciousness, temporary and ultimately powerless to change who you fundamentally are. Brother Myoan was his own worst enemy. While other monks at the monastery struggled with external distractions, Myoan's greatest obstacle was the harsh voice in his own head that constantly pointed out his failures and inadequacies. During meditation, instead of finding peace, Myoan would berate himself for every wandering thought. "You're terrible at this," the voice would say. "Everyone else can concentrate better than you. You'll never amount to anything as a practitioner." In daily work, the same voice provided a running commentary of criticism. When he made mistakes in copying sutras, the voice called him careless and stupid. When he struggled with difficult passages, it told him he wasn't intelligent enough for serious study. When he felt tired during long meditation sessions, it accused him of being lazy and uncommitted. This internal criticism had started in childhood with demanding parents and harsh teachers, but over the years, Myoan had fully internalized these voices. He no longer needed external critics because he had become expert at criticizing himself. The irony was that Myoan's self-criticism was motivated by a genuine desire to improve. He thought that being harsh with himself would motivate better performance and spiritual growth. Instead, the constant mental abuse was exhausting him and making progress nearly impossible. Master Ijo, observing Myoan's struggle, decided to try an experiment. One day, he called Myoan to his quarters and gave him an unusual assignment. "For the next week," Ijo said, "I want you to treat yourself exactly as you would treat a beloved younger brother who was just beginning to learn about Zen practice." Myoan looked confused. "I don't understand, Master. When your little brother made mistakes, would you call him stupid and worthless?" "Of course not," Myoan replied, horrified at the thought. "When he struggled with difficult concepts, would you tell him he wasn't intelligent enough?" "Never. I would encourage him and help him understand. When he felt tired from practicing, would you call him lazy? No, I would tell him that rest is natural and that he was doing well." Ijo nodded. "For 1 week, I want you to speak to yourself the way you would speak to this beloved brother. When the critical voice arises, ask yourself, would I say this to someone I love who is trying their best?" Myoan felt skeptical about this approach. "But Master, if I'm not strict with myself, won't I become lazy and stop improving?" "Let's find out," Ijo said simply. 1 week. Treat yourself with the same kindness you would show a dear friend. The first day was difficult. Myoan's habit of self-criticism was so strong that catching and changing these thoughts required constant vigilance. During meditation, when his mind wandered and the familiar voice began its criticism, Myoan experimented with responding differently. Instead of "you're hopeless at meditation," he tried thinking, "it's natural for the mind to wander. You're learning, and learning takes time." Instead of "you're so stupid for not understanding this teaching," he practiced thinking, "this is a difficult concept. Many people struggle with it. You'll understand it when you're ready." The change in internal atmosphere was dramatic. Instead of feeling beaten down by his practice, Myoan began to feel supported by it. His meditation became more peaceful because he wasn't constantly at war with himself. His study became more enjoyable because mistakes felt like learning opportunities rather than evidence of failure. By the end of the week, Myoan was astonished by the results. Not only did he feel happier and more peaceful, but his actual performance had improved. His meditation was deeper, his understanding clearer, and his energy higher. When he reported these results to Master Ijo, the teacher smiled. "What did you discover?" "I discovered that I can motivate myself through kindness more effectively than through cruelty," Myoan said. "When I stopped wasting energy fighting myself, I had more energy available for actual practice." "And what about the fear that kindness would make you lazy?" Myoan laughed. "That was completely backwards. The criticism was what made me want to give up. The kindness made me want to keep trying." "Tell me," Ijo continued, "if you had a student who came to you filled with self-doubt and harsh self-judgment, How would you help them? I would treat them with patience and compassion until they learned to see their own worth, Myoan replied without hesitation. Then perhaps you can be such a teacher to yourself. From that day forward, Myoan's practice was transformed. He learned to catch self-critical thoughts, not with more criticism, but with gentle redirection, the way a kind teacher guides a struggling student. His spiritual progress accelerated dramatically, not because he became less discriminating about his practice, but because he approached improvement from a foundation of self-respect rather than self-attack. Years later, when Myoan became known as a particularly compassionate and effective teacher, students would ask him about his methods. He would tell them, "The most important thing I learned was to become my own friend rather than my own enemy." Everything else followed from that. Myoan's story illustrates a crucial distinction between helpful and harmful self-evaluation. There's a difference between honest assessment that comes from a place of caring and harsh criticism that comes from a place of judgment and attack. The voice that called Myoan stupid and hopeless wasn't actually trying to help him improve. It was expressing old patterns of shame and inadequacy that had nothing to do with his current efforts. True motivation for growth comes from self-respect and genuine care for our own development, not from internal abuse. The experiment that Master Ijo suggested reveals how we often treat ourselves worse than we would treat anyone else. We use a tone of voice with ourselves that we would never use with a friend or even a stranger. This double standard creates unnecessary suffering and actually impedes the growth we're trying to encourage. Myoan discovered that kindness is not weakness, but strength. When we approach our mistakes and limitations with compassion, we create a safe space for genuine learning and change. When we attack ourselves for imperfections, we create internal conditions that make growth more difficult. This teaching has particular relevance for the self-critical thoughts that often arise as we prepare for sleep. Many people lie awake reviewing the day's mistakes, berating themselves for things they said or didn't say, criticizing their performance or behavior. Instead of adding exhaustion from self-criticism to the fatigue from daily life, we can practice Myoan's approach. When critical thoughts arise, we can ask ourselves, would I speak this way to someone I care about who is doing their best? This simple question can transform our internal atmosphere from hostile to supportive. This doesn't mean ignoring genuine areas for improvement or avoiding responsibility for our actions. It means approaching self-evaluation from a foundation of basic respect and care rather than judgment and attack. As you settle into rest tonight, you can practice being your own kind friend rather than your own harsh critic. Notice any voices of judgment that arise and experiment with responding to them the way you would respond to a beloved person who is struggling. This shift from self-criticism to self-compassion often creates the inner peace that makes deep, restorative sleep possible. The kindness you offer to yourself isn't just a nice gesture. It's a practical tool for creating the mental conditions that support both growth and rest. Like Myoan, you might discover that treating yourself as a friend rather than an enemy transforms not just your sleep, but your entire relationship with learning and living. Master Gute had developed a reputation for something quite unusual. He seemed to have no memory of yesterday and no concern for tomorrow. Students who came to study with him were often puzzled by his complete absorption in whatever was happening right now. A wealthy merchant named Takeshi came to visit Gute, seeking advice about a business decision that had been troubling him for months. The merchant had invested heavily in a trading venture that had failed, losing nearly half his fortune. He was consumed with regret about the decision and anxiety, about how to rebuild his wealth. "Master Gutei," Takeshi said during their first meeting, "6 months ago I made a terrible choice that has cost me everything. I can't stop thinking about what I should have done differently. And now I'm paralyzed by fear about my future. How can I move forward when I'm haunted by the past and terrified of making another mistake?" Gutei listened carefully, then asked a simple question. "What is the weather like right now?" Takeshi looked confused. "Master, I just told you about my financial disaster. Why are you asking about the weather?" "Please," Gutei said gently, "just tell me about the weather." Reluctantly, Takeshi glanced toward the window. "It's partly cloudy. There's a gentle breeze. The temperature is pleasant." "Good," Gutei nodded. "And you're breathing right now?" "My breathing?" Takeshi felt increasingly frustrated by these seemingly irrelevant questions. "It's normal, I suppose. Is it fast or slow? Deep or shallow?" Despite his impatience, Takeshi paid attention to his breath. "It's a bit shallow and quick, probably because I'm anxious." "And the feeling of sitting on this cushion?" "Master, I don't understand how these details matter when my whole life is falling apart." Gutei smiled peacefully. "Your life is not falling apart. Your story about your life is creating suffering. The weather is pleasant, your breathing is working perfectly, and you are safely sitting on a comfortable cushion. This is your actual life right now. But the money I lost, the decision I made, where is this decision now?" Gutei interrupted gently. "Can you show it to me?" Takeshi was quiet for a moment. "It's in the past." "And the past exists where?" "In my memory." "So you are suffering because of thoughts about something that no longer exists and worrying about things that haven't happened yet and may never happen. But the consequences of that decision are real. I have less money now." "Yes," Gutei agreed, "and that is a present moment fact. You have less money today than you had before. But you are treating this present moment fact as a tragedy because you are comparing it to a past state and fearing future scenarios." Gutei gestured around his simple room. "I also have less money than some people and more than others. I have less money today than I will if someone gives me some, and more money than I will if I give some away. These are just present moment conditions, no more tragic than the weather being cloudy instead of sunny." Over the following weeks, Takeshi found himself drawn back to conversations with Gutei. Each time he tried to discuss his past mistakes or future fears, the master would gently redirect his attention to immediate present experience. "What do you see when you look out that window right now? How does your tea taste? What sounds are you hearing at this moment?" Initially, Takeshi found this redirecting irritating. It seemed like the master was avoiding his real problems. But gradually, something began to shift. The more time he spent focused on immediate sensory experience, the less consumed he became with mental stories about past and future. One day, during a particularly pleasant conversation about the feeling of warm sunlight streaming through the window, Takeshi suddenly laughed. "Master," he said, "I just realized something strange. Right now, in this moment, I have no problems." "Ah," Gutei smiled, "you're beginning to understand. Problems exist in time, but you exist in the present moment. When you live where you are rather than where you think you should be, problems dissolve into simple present moment conditions that you can address clearly. But surely I need to plan for the future and learn from the past. Of course, Gute replied, but you can only plan and learn in the present moment. When you try to live in the past or future, you lose access to the intelligence and clarity that can actually address practical matters. From that day forward, Takeshi's approach to his business challenges changed completely. Instead of being paralyzed by regret and fear, he began making clear-headed decisions based on current conditions. His natural business intelligence, no longer clouded by mental time travel, led to surprisingly good outcomes. A year later, when people asked Takeshi how he had recovered so well from his financial losses, he would say, "I learned to live in the only time that actually exists. Everything else is just imagination, and you can't solve real problems with imaginary ones." This story illustrates one of Zen Buddhism's most practical insights. Most of our suffering comes not from present moment circumstances, but from our thoughts about past and future. Takeshi's actual present moment contained pleasant weather, comfortable seating, and functional breathing. His suffering came entirely from mental narratives about events that no longer existed and scenarios that hadn't occurred. Master Gute's gentle redirection wasn't an avoidance technique, but a return to reality. The past exists only as present moment memories, and the future exists only as present moment imagination. All our actual power to understand, decide, and act is available only in the present moment. This teaching doesn't suggest ignoring practical planning or learning from experience. Rather, it points out that effective planning and learning happen in present awareness, not in the mental loops of regret and worry that often masquerade as productive thinking. For those seeking peaceful sleep, this understanding is transformative. Much of our bedtime mental activity consists of replaying past events or rehearsing future scenarios. Neither of these mental activities can change anything, but both can keep us awake for hours. When we learn to return attention to immediate present experience, the feeling of our body against the bed, the rhythm of our breathing, the sounds in our environment, we often discover that the present moment contains no problems that require solving right now. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might practice Gute's approach. When your mind travels to past conversations or future concerns, gently ask yourself, what is my actual experience right now? Notice the simple sensory realities of this moment. Often, you'll discover that the present contains natural peace, while suffering lives only in mental stories about other times. The present moment isn't always comfortable, but it's always manageable in a way that mental time travel rarely island. When we stop trying to solve yesterday's problems or prevent tomorrow's difficulties, we can rest in the reality of now, which often contains more peace than our minds had imagined. Brother Daito had been assigned the night watch at his monastery, a duty that required staying awake from midnight until dawn to tend the fire and watch for any emergencies. Most monks considered this an undesirable assignment that interfered with normal sleep schedules, but Daito approached it with his characteristic diligence. For the first few months, Daito struggled with the night shift. His body wanted to sleep during his watch hours, and he found his mind racing with thoughts to stay alert. He would think about monastery business, plan future projects, or replay conversations from the day. Sometimes he would worry about oversleeping and letting the fire die, or imagine various disaster scenarios he might need to handle. The mental activity that Daito used to stay awake was exhausting. By morning, he felt drained not just from lack of sleep, but from hours of mental churning. His daytime rest was often disturbed by an overactive mind that had learned to stay busy throughout the night. One night, while sitting by the fire around 3 a.m., Daito noticed something different. His mind had grown quiet, not from effort, but from simple fatigue. In that quietness, he became aware of sounds he had never noticed during his months of mental busyness. The gentle crackling of the fire, wind moving through trees outside, the distant sound of a stream, even his own heartbeat. For the first time since beginning night watch, Daito felt completely present. Instead of thinking about other times and places, he was simply here, now, with the fire and the night sounds. Despite being technically awake and alert, he felt more rested than he had in months. As this natural awareness continued through the remaining hours until dawn, Daito experienced something remarkable. Each moment seemed complete in itself. The dancing flames, the shifting shadows, the gradual changes in night sounds as different creatures became active, all of it felt vivid and satisfying in a way his previous mental activity had never been. When morning came and another monk arrived to relieve him, Daito realized he felt refreshed despite having been awake all night. More puzzling still, when he went to his quarters to rest, he fell asleep easily and naturally, without the mental churning that had previously made daytime sleep difficult. That evening, Daito approached his watch duties with curiosity about what had happened. Instead of filling the time with thoughts and mental projects, he experimented with the same quality of simple presence he had discovered accidentally. Each night became a different exploration. Sometimes he focused on the immediate sensory experience of tending the fire. Other nights he listened deeply to the symphony of sounds that emerged in the silence. Always, he practiced returning his attention to whatever was actually happening right now, rather than mental commentary about it. After several weeks of this practice, Daito made a discovery that transformed his understanding of alertness and rest. He found that present moment awareness was naturally wakeful without being agitated, and naturally peaceful without being drowsy. It was a different quality of consciousness than either conventional sleep or conventional waking. Other monks began to notice changes in Daito. Despite working night shifts, he seemed more rested and peaceful than when he had followed normal schedules. His daytime meditation was deeper, his mood more stable, and his presence somehow more concentrated yet relaxed. When the abbot asked Daito about these changes, he explained his discovery. "I learned that consciousness itself doesn't need entertainment or mental activity to stay alert. When I stopped trying to manufacture wakefulness through thinking, I found a natural awareness that included both rest and alertness." "How is this different from falling asleep?" the abbot asked with interest. "When I fall asleep, awareness disappears," Daito replied. "But this is awareness remaining aware, just without all the mental commentary I usually add to it. It's like the difference between a busy marketplace and a clear mountain lake. Both can be awake, but one is agitated and the other is peaceful."